All right, we're happy to be live with Gene Hoffman, the CEO of Chia Network Incorporated. Gene, I was wondering if you could just give us a quick introduction. And the first question I had is, are you on your boat? Because we are all so jealous of the life you get to live. And I've seen pictures of the boat, love the boat.
Well, thank you. No, today I am unfortunately in my home office, but was on the boat as recently as Friday and Saturday. So,
Yeah, I did not know that you actually spent that much time, lived on the boat, officed out of the boat. I had seen the Chia community mention it, and you mentioned it, Gene. But uh, that's yeah. Aren't you in San Francisco
yeah,
also?
exactly. Yeah, I keep my boat just north of the San Francisco airport, and
Oh boy.
I took it so far that I've got a 100-ton inland master license from the Coast Guard. So,
Well, that is the coup de grace of living in San Francisco, to have a boat and to escape out into the bay.
yep.
Um, well, bravo. Um,
Yeah. So anyway, we thought we'd just get right into some of the stuff that we were interested in talking about. So, Gene, in the early days of Chia Mainnet, there was some talk about CBDCs. We haven't heard as much lately. Do you feel that the prerequisites for a CBDC are in place for Chia, or if not, what's still yet to be done to make it so that if a country wanted to launch a CBDC on top of Chia, like what's still needed to make that work?
The number one thing that's still not complete to really run a CBDC, and I'll pause and go, there are retail CBDCs and there are wholesale CBDCs, and the kind of difference is whether like end users are using it or whether like banks are using it to settle between themselves. The latter is actually probably doable today. The former probably needs payment channels in place to really be able to be as kind of responsive and scale at the speed that consumers would want their payments to go through at. So, we're kind of excited about what Bram has been doing with on-chain gaming payment channels, state channels actually, and they get us about half the way there to working payment channel implementation. So, we feel we're pretty well future-proof, but I think the bigger question about CBDCs is that for a CBDC to be really useful, it has to be as good or better programmatically than, say, USDC. And I don't think most governments are yet at a place where they're comfortable with the relaxation of the standards, if you will, to be able to be that kind of cash and that kind of competitive. So I think it will come. I just think it's going to take quite a few more years.
When you say it's ready right now, or that you could do a settlement CBDC between banks or governments, would that be a cat, or it's a variant of a cat? Like we have Chia Lisp and it's possible to do it, or like you could actually just use the existing Chia asset token infrastructure to pull it off.
Especially for a wholesale when you're settling between banks and large payers. Cat 2 works today for what they need. There's no real need for additional restrictions, because depending on how they want to roll out a wholesale CBDC, you're generally not going to let just anybody play. And once you enforce those who's in who's out rules offline, then you don't really need to do anything with the cat standard to like make it so that it's limiting or requires a DID or anything like that. It's more when you start getting back to the retail side that some governments kind of say, hey, I want these additional restrictions. I think that's a bad idea from a go-to-market perspective. But we already have some of those with credential restricted cats. And for equity cats, you're going to see an ability to reissue. So, those additional kind of minor restrictions are relatively easy to implement. But again, I think a wholesale wouldn't need them at all.
and when you talk about the retail side too, I listen to the Secretary of the Treasury Yellen, Janet Yellen, and the Chair Jerome Powell of the Fed in their meetings with Congress, and members of Congress, the political. The CBDC seems to be a hot topic and a naughty, dirty word with a lot of members of the crypto community. Not many people outside of the crypto community understand that. But when members of Congress are talking to Powell and Yellen, they've been very adamant that they don't want to see CBDC get that, but the response from Yellen and Powell both has been that everybody else is doing it. The United States needs to be moving with the rest of the world, needs to have responsive digital currency. Is Chia? Is this something that other nation states are doing on their own, or are they going to be looking for solutions like Chia, like established blockchains, to be building off of?
Well, so to answer the end of your question, doing a CBDC on a non-public blockchain is going to be a failure because it's not going to be as usable as USDC or Tether, right? Because that's your competition. The political discourse in the United States on CBDC is a little overly naive. There's two types of CBDCs, privacy protecting CBDCs and the CBDCs that the kind of Warren financial infrastructure, everything must be KYC'd want. The political consensus in Congress is that the US should not do a CBDC unless and until it can do an anonymous and privacy protecting CBDC. And when you start to put those sorts of requirements on it, the really only blockchains that can do it are, frankly, Bitcoin to a lesser extent and Chia. And most of the research that's been done by MIT on behalf of the Treasury has been on Bitcoin-style payment channels to do a privacy-protecting CBDC. And the natural home for that ultimately would be Chia due to Chia Lisp and its kind of correct implementation of most Bitcoin fundamentals, but with actual real programmability. The other countries are generally independent. I mean, you've got China with a private blockchain version of the RMB, and it is as useful as it just sounded like. You've got folks like Singapore and Switzerland who are certainly serious about wanting to do this, but they don't yet see a clear winner, and they are cognizant of, if you do this, you're going to have to deal with the incorrect and short-sighted view that every transaction should be KYC'd. And the answer is that, normal human beings do tremendous numbers of transactions, including buying their groceries without KYC. And that has been a political showstopper in all these other countries for them to realize that to be an effective and competitive currency, that they would have to relax what has been kind of the, recently in vogue set of rights restrictions that just aren't very useful.
So when you mentioned Bitcoin as being one place that it could be done, we've been talking with some of the folks in the Bitcoin community about the lack of opcodes and programmability that's needed. It seems like we're probably pretty far off from being able to do something like a CBDC on top of Bitcoin. Would you say that there's a significant amount of tech that Bitcoin would need to adopt before they'd be able to do it? Because I don't think trying to do something a la Lightning or Bolt would probably not fit the bill, right?
Well, so that's where the MIT team's gone is Lightning style and minor enhancements. But of course, if you go that direction, it's easier to implement that today on Chia. The kind of reverse thing is you need a lot of what we're doing and some of what Bitcoin is doing. It's really hard for Bitcoin to do a lot of what we're doing anytime soon. It's really easy for us to add some of the stuff that's going on at Bitcoin.
So that leads me to another question, sort of around the whole regulatory infrastructure, related to CBDCs and how, that it's being thought about, especially in the context of FIT 21, right? FIT 21 sort of talks about digital currencies, and I think it, although I don't think it has the actual letters strung together like that, you can clearly see where it's talking about a CBDC. Did you have a chance to participate in the authorship of FIT 21, or how close were you to FIT 21?
We got the changes we wanted and needed in without any worries whatsoever. One of the things we often get swept into when people are talking about regulatory issues around cryptocurrency is a lot of cryptocurrencies ownership of coins is voting rights, and Chia, Bitcoin, no voting rights. We think that's a really bad idea, actually. And so one of the changes we had made to FIT, which was completely trivial, was to make it clear that the amount of coins was about whether or not you had voting control, not about whether you owned economic interest. And there were a few other comments that we got in as well that were less critical, more us just trying to help build a really good bill. We're excited about it. I think we're one of the few entities in the crypto space that is, universally excited about it. I think some of the criticisms of it, especially around DeFi, are a little overblown. I think it's more intentionally trying to punt some of the DeFi issues and intentionally instead of, trying to sweep DeFi in. Think distributed exchange mostly. But yeah, no, I think FIT21 is really trying to create a workable framework that would allow both privately issued CBDC equivalents, which is what USDC is. And, one of the things you need to think about when you think about CBDCs in the United States is the Treasury backs money. It doesn't really issue money. I mean, it issues paper money, but remember, it issues paper money and gives that to banks. Banks are really where money creation occurs in the United States, and those are private entities, well, semi-private entities. And so any CBDC in the US would likely be issued by the banks. I mean, the process would be that you would go into your checking account and say, hey, I want $100 worth of USD Treasury. And that would then transfer $100 out of your checking account by debiting your checking account and would create by issuance 100 USDT.
So do you think either of these presidential candidates is more likely to help usher in FIT21, or do you think that this is kind of almost bipartisan at this point? Does it?
Well, so the good news is it is bipartisan. The issue is going to be that, if you're reading the tea leaves and the various close races, the Republicans are likely to pick up further seats in both houses. And with that, it makes it so that something like FIT21 kind of becomes a fait accompli. It's close already. I can tell you there's some debates in the Senate, and we'll see another bill from Stabenow that I've had a chance to look at. And it's, I don't know how to put it, a little more concise, but also equally useful. It doesn't really deal with the sufficiently decentralized issues as much. It's much more targeted at Coinbase, honestly. But, something's going to happen, most likely in the next term. The things that are obvious and easy are, well, three things. The SAB 121 issues, which was, the SEC creating the accounting rules that don't exist, but we'll ignore that for a second. Just generally legalizing Circle USDC. I think that's one of the big things you'll see get done one way or another. And then the general concept of kind of taking the 2019 SEC guidance and turning that into a workable way to define a sufficiently decentralized cryptocurrency.
So how about Chevron Deference? How is that going to play in to anything that's going on with Chia? Did you guys get a chance to look at that? Did Thomas say, "Oh, this makes a big difference for us in some particular way"? What's your thoughts there? Or have you had a chance to look into it?
Well, look, in my hobby litigation, getting rid of Chevron has been on the high level of the agenda for a very long time, both for my hobby work and my work.
Oh wait, that was on your short list.
Oh yeah.
Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the concern with Chevron isn't necessarily about cryptocurrency directly. It's more about DeFi and the definition of exchange. So, with Chevron deference, the SEC could kind of walk into court and say, well, we regulate exchanges, and therefore we claim that this thing that doesn't take any custody and has no physical location and isn't actually centralized is an exchange. And the judges had to kind of listen to them. Well, Chevron gone, that gets analyzed directly on the an exchange is a physical place, and at most it has been digitized, but it still is a place. And you do not get to regulate non-places because non-places include things like eBay.
Well, so when I was looking at Chevron, and I definitely bow to your superior knowledge of the law here, so I'm curious about how my understanding might be not correct here, but it seemed like Chevron said that you needed to have public comment and weigh in, and it couldn't just be that these agencies got to shoot from the hip, that there had to be more political discourse, or there had to be firm guidance from the legislative bodies to be able to say, here's how policy is going to be enacted by an agency. Is that right? Or
I think it's easier to tell you what began to undo Chevron deference. So the EPA went out and took its 1970 era set of law that enabled the EPA and tried to read that they could regulate carbon dioxide into it. And the law is pretty clear that these were very specific, well understood, nasty things like sulfur dioxide and these things we all knew, we didn't want polluting in the environment. You can't not have an environment with CO2. And so that was kind of the first time that the Supreme Court actually kind of went, you know what? I know we're supposed to follow Chevron deference, but this is bullshit. And so the issue is that pre the removal of the Chevron doctrine, the agency got the benefit of the doubt when interpreting their own statutes. Post, the judge gets to look at the statute and say, does the statute that was passed, say, in 1930 or 1940 really cover the activity that's described as a decentralized exchange, for example?
And what if it doesn't? Like, then what?
Then if it doesn't, it's up to Congress to pass a law.
But what about the public comment part? What is that about?
Oh, that's always been there. And the issue is that, how do I put this? If the public doesn't have the right to comment on whether the actual text passed by Congress enables this executive entity to do what they're doing, then it's not a good comment series. And in the old Chevron days, you could kind of do that. You could kind of, as the agency, go, we believe the law says this, and therefore we're going to ignore you if you say it's not.
And Gene, do you think first you mentioned your hobby list? Was that in regards to any particular project? But also, and sorry to give you all these double barrel questions, but do you think that the repeal of Chevron doctrine will also lead the administrative agencies to be more advisory than regulatory? Because if they're looking to, I don't know, perpetuate their existence, and yet they do not have teeth, is that part of your expectation of the effect it'll have on them?
Well, look, I'll say it this way: pre-Chevron, and also pre the most recent administration, like the ATF literally changed the definition of what is a firearm, and they made it so that, like, you're starting to get to a correct rectangle of aluminum as a firearm is where they'd like to go. That law was passed in the 60s, and somehow in the last 4 years, a 60-year-old congressional act somehow changed. That's what happened in the Chevron days. So the issue is the ATF correctly defined what a firearm is back in the 60s, and they should stick with it unless and until Congress changes the law and they need to go reinterpret it. And that's the real issue. Like, it's not that you can't have an executive function entity write regulations that stay true to the law that Congress passes, and Congress is still going to be able to pass laws that clearly delegate certain authorities to the various entities. And so, like, I don't know if Fit 21 had a little of this. The Statement Out bill, when you get to see it, it specifically says, hey, look, the SEC needs to go out and do a rulemaking about this to set up these rules with these kinds of broad parameters that then the SEC can narrow and define and set into regulatory code. That's a completely valid exercise of congressional authority and will continue to work, and there's no real problem with that. The problem was the regulatory agencies would wake up like a decade later and somehow claim the law changed, and the courts had to actually defer to them.
Lucas, did you want to ask any other follow-up questions to that? Otherwise, I might take us in a different direction unless you want to stick with this.
No, I think that I'm glad to see Chevron Deference repealed. I was tickled to hear you say that was high on your list of druthers, Gene. I would love to see the administrative agencies move to a more advisory role. I don't disagree with their existence or some of the services they provide. I just think that it's been abused. But we wander off into the weeds. Go ahead, Grant. Let's pivot.
Yeah. So, Gene, the other day we saw Larry Fink come on and talking with Jim Cramer and just publicly announce that he got Bitcoin wrong.
Yep.
Like, just 180'd on it, which I was like kind of fell out of my chair when I saw that happen. I mean, I know that, he's obviously been working on these things, but just to like say that he made a mistake and kind of publicly admit it and say, he's turned the corner on it. The number of cryptos that Larry Fink has actually mentioned is actually quite small. He hasn't actually talked about that many different ones, but he's mentioned Chia. So I guess just a question. Have you been in contact with Larry Fink lately? Is he still thinking about Chia? What's going on with Chia and or Blackrock?
So, I can't talk about things that aren't done yet, but I can say that, obviously we have been engaged with BlackRock. I think quite a few financial institutions kind of survey the landscape and realize that there are basically three blockchains that matter: Bitcoin, Ethereum, and us. And the problem that everybody's had, and I've been saying this for many years, is that everyone's afraid of using public Ethereum because of all of the solidity, reentrancy issues, and other things. It's just something where you can't be like the CIO of Citibank and go tell the CEO that you just lost 50 million to the North Koreans. So as tokenization of real world assets continues to be top of mind for all of these folks, we are in that conversation.
So along the same kind of line, virtual private blockchains was something that we heard a fair bit from Chia Network Incorporated.
Mhm.
What's going on with virtual private blockchains? Is this still kind of a big internal project, or is there a customer that's close to being attached to it, or what's going on with the virtual private blockchains?
So virtual private blockchain is a way to describe a set of features that are just already there. And what it really is getting people comfortable with the things they think they want and need out of a private blockchain. They can use ChiaLisp and our tools to actually get. So, between using data layer to be able to coordinate with consortia and keep the data private instead of public like CAD and using DID and credential restricted CATs today, you can actually have all of the control that you might think you need and launch something on the Chia blockchain. And what's the difference is that often that first use case isn't super compelling on a blockchain because you got to get past your own internal regulatory folks and your regulator. But if you're on a public blockchain and you've implemented those access controls, you can then start to prove to your regulator, to your bosses, to your outside regulator that, hey, look, we want to do this transaction with this Japanese bank that's not in the consortia. We're going to ask for an exception to do that. And then you do that and it works. And people start to understand the power of the network effect around you. So it now makes sense sometimes to do not perfect use cases initially to get going, and then slowly but surely relax those restrictions so that it becomes very powerful from a network perspective.
So it's not that a virtual private blockchain is like somebody running a fork of Chia on a bunch of hardware with permissioned validators. This is something else.
This is exactly the opposite. It is your 60, 70,000 Chia validators are more trustworthy than the ones you'd run yourself. Instead, focus on access control to your application or your asset.
So in what you just said, you mentioned a couple things that I'm super curious about. So we had a chance to look at the roadmap recently, and the thing that caught our eye, obviously besides gaming, which we're very excited about. So I'd love to talk a bit more about that later. But notice that there's like a relaunch of DID, the distributed identity or the decentralized identity, and verifiable credentials. What's the thought here? Why do we need like to take another crack at this? Was there deficiencies that were identified in the original implementation, or was this customer feedback where somebody that wanted to use this stuff said, this is a good idea, but it's not quite what we needed?
So when we launched the original versions of DID, it was definitely a kind of beta version. We knew that it did not have all the features and functionality that we ultimately knew we wanted. And so we took the course of getting a minimum viable version of it out there for now so that people were comfortable with and could, use the most base use cases. We knew that we wanted the stuff that you see currently on the pipeline. And I will tell you, we had a customer loss that was very informative that was like, yep, we definitely needed that. And it was an opportunity that we would like to be able to win in the future. And it was a kind of a surprise rush through our pipeline. But point being, it is absolutely driven by confirmation from real customers that what we were thinking about made a ton of sense. And look, when we do DoD and VC right, you start getting into things like driver's licenses and work certificates and liquor licenses, and even things like single sign-on. There is a really interesting world where, in fact, the Chia blockchain with the ID and VC implemented correctly is kind of the ultimate single sign-on provider for the people who have the highest security needs. If you're the CIA, being able to just update your verifier and remember that all the authentication would happen off chain and offline. So people would not see people logging into like email at the CIA, but there'd be no way to compromise the entire single sign-on and SAML infrastructure without compromising the underlying keys that they're probably using on HSMs, right? That's a pretty powerful tool that we think verifiable credentials and digital identity can actually create, but it's just not something we want to focus on yet. You can only do so many things at once.
But this one's coming up at the end of this year, is a relaunch of this, right?
Yeah, and I will caution that we might slip this one a little bit because we want to get some more of the one market features complete. It really is getting kind of the UDP of offers, if you will, really working well, and getting the view of how DEXs with good self custody really work.
So when we're talking about one market, I know that one thing that is like from the roadmap, it says this is happening right now, that the Cloud Wallet Pro closed beta is happening in this quarter. Is that already launched, or is that still to come later in the quarter?
The closed beta is any minute now. We're actually going to be running the beta of the not enterprise level, the free tier. And in fact, I think we're going to run the free tier end to end next week. So you should start to see this coming out. Where there's a ton of work being done in what are currently private repos, so you can't see them yet. That are these cloud wallet infrastructures.
Is this something that you can talk a bit more about, or do you want to wait until?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, what I can't do is I can't tell you exactly what the price is going to be. I can tell you kind of what the tiers are going to be and what's going to be in different tiers.
Okay, so can you give us a brief description of like the cloud wallet? To me, it means I've got this interface, like a website, where I can look at my read-only type data. And then if I want to do some sort of mutative operation, I've got a wallet connect into it or something like that. Is that the gist of it? I would be using some sort of a signer app. So, we're pairing the iOS signer app with the cloud wallet. And so I can, through the website, sort of see everything that's associated with, my keychain, if you will. But then if I want to spend a coin or do something, I've got to use a signer app or some kind of a wallet connect interface. Is that it in a nutshell?
Yeah. I mean, so basically there's two things that are really critical to understand about the cloud wallet. Thing one is that most of its functionality is aimed at multi-user wallet. Like most people in retail don't think about a multi-user wallet need. But if you're a business, you can't spend money without two people signing off. And so layered atop kind of the wallet concept is going to be a actual access control environment where like your chief security officer can assign people who are managers. These are people who can sign. These are people who can only ask for things to be signed. And so there's a little bit more control around that. And like, Chia Network Inc. will have an account in the cloud wallet that will ultimately hold the strategic reserve. And, there'll be people inside our finance team who can ask the 5 people who are authorized to make a payment to make that payment. It will then automatically do a push request to, my phone to pop up and go, hey, so-and-so authenticated has asked to sign this. You can inspect it here. Here's a link back to the web to inspect it as well on the web in your interface. And then when you agree that it's right, you'll hit sign on your Apple device or your later Android phone using the secure element there. That will get pushed up to the cloud wallet. And then the cloud wallet, when you're collecting like a 3 of 5, will just sit there and store that temporarily and wait for the other 2. Once the other 2 come, it may send a notification out to everybody going, hey, the signature's been completed. We're done here. And then like things that are configurable, it'll either immediately put it on chain, or it might queue it up and wait and say, be scheduled to put it on chain at midnight. So it's those kind of tools around the slightly more sophisticated uses that the enterprise levels of the cloud wallet are really targeted at. If you're just an end user, you don't need all that. You don't have to have like a, delegates and other things. You're just going to have your vault, and you're going to manage your vault with multiple devices. But, in enterprise, you kind of have a wallet of vaults, and each vault is the kind of individual's identity and access control. But then there's an idea of the organization doing things and having that track and having all of the, just convenience features, be that, someone who knows nothing about blockchain, who's like controller of, can say, hey, we need to send this much to this party. That gets pushed to the people who need to be able to sign that. They can review it securely, sign it, and then it automatically goes out to the chain.
Well, I mean, I can see the progression of what you guys are contemplating, or that you're building, and that you're contemplating in the roadmap here, right? You've got this cloud wallet intended for enterprise. You're talking about access control. Okay, but how are we going to identify users? Oh, that's right. It's going to be the new DID standard. So,
well, we're going to start with just generating vaults. So, like, let me talk about the free tier for a second, because people are going to be using it. You're going to walk up to the Chia, like wallet.chia.net, and you're going to create a new vault, and it's going to prompt you for your iPhone by popping up a QR code. You'll download the iOS Signer app. That will get you access to your secure element, which will generate a private key and a public key. And then you will push that public key back to your cloud wallet, and it'll pop up and give you 12 words, which is a BLS recovery key for that vault. You'll hopefully write those down. And then from now on, you have a secure element controlled off your iPhone and later Android, basic one market capable wallet. Think of it as a buyer's wallet in the one market, where you can store basic things, create offers, accept offers. Lose your iPhone, use those 12 words, put a new iPhone in.
Gotcha. So that allows you to do like a recovery path.
Correct. Now, and that's the free version. The regular version is going to be a full vault. So you're going to have, 2 hardware devices and likely an institution as a backup third party.
Any current institutions that you guys have been thinking about, or is that too early to announce anybody that you might be working with on an institutional level?
I'll just say that we have 2 different institutions that are targeted to one more enterprise and one more retail, and expect to hopefully announce them both as we continue to launch this application.
Lucas, I just wanted to give you a chance, as I've been kind of barreling forward here, but did anything that we've talked about recently spark a question or something you wanted to jump in on?
No, I'm enjoying it. You guys keep going. It's I'm glad to hear what. No, I don't. Grant, keep going.
Okay, so I've been watching the gaming repo, right?
Yep.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
So as a developer, it's always fascinating to me to see the progression of commits, right? And I don't want to nerd out too much on seeing specific things that are being developed, but I guess I'm curious, having heard Bram say that he worked on the layer 2 piece, gave the specification to Art, and Art was, furiously parsing it and getting ready to implement it. Can you give us a little update on how far along they are on the implementation of L2s? Like, what's going on there, and is it a significant deviation from Lightning and or Bolt? Like, are we seeing like the actual next gen L2 being created here and facilitated by Chia Lisp?
Well, so how to answer that question the best way? So for the first part, the whole goal right now is to basically transition Bram out of being a critical path element to finishing it out. So you should think about it as mostly feature complete and specification completely. Now, feature complete in the core technology, not in the user interface and UX yet. That will be coming next, and that's what we're trying to transition it out of Bram and even somewhat out of Art sooner or later into kind of core regular team folks. What this is, it's a state channel. So it's not a payment channel yet. And what I mean by that is it does most of what a Lightning channel does, except like we haven't tackled routing here. There are some other things with payments that you just don't have to necessarily do. But on the same side, it is a state channel that enforces rules of games. And those rules of games can be pretty complicated. So like different poker variants, Wordle is going to be one of the things that's there from the gate. And so the fact that you're kind of using Chia Lisp to implement those rules and confirm that the next turn meets the rules before that turn is complete is a pretty powerful tool. Because it's not full payment channels, we didn't do some of the things that we know we want to do that are out there as futures for Lightning. And that's just because we don't need them yet. But it is really powerful from a sales perspective to be able to walk into a country that's thinking out a CBDC and show them playing, poker for money peer-to-peer on a payment channel and see that it's literally real time and, completely secure. So, it's definitely, we can't say, hey, we're completely done. Here's a payment channel. But we can say, look, a good half of the effort necessary is already complete. And, look, we're going to be a 40 TPS blockchain again here real darn soon. 40 TPS is a lot. The Fedwire service in the United States is only 9 TPS at its peaks. So, we have time and room, and that's one of the reasons why we don't think we have to be further. But we do want to have, a credible code base that's demonstratable and a real application to show that, building these things on Chia is very straightforward.
So transitioning it out from Bram and Art, is there a line in the sand you're trying to see it get to? Like what is the feature completeness or like demonstration of what needs to be done before it actually gets transitioned to the core development team?
Yeah, I need to look because this is very real time. But the key, there are 2 key steps. Key step number 1 was that you could play it, but not in the gaming channel. So you'd have to wait a minute for each block, and that's acceptable for the developer team to be able to go ahead and start testing and building user interface. The next major milestone is to be able to then actually be playing it in the state channel. I believe we're at that second piece. I'm not sure about that, but I believe that's what we're thinking. We're very, very close to. And once the core play works, and think painful CLI, then it's going to be sit down, do some architecture on what we want to do with user interface, and then start building that, right? And that's the next couple months. But it does also kind of compete with some resources that are already here on the map, because you'll notice gaming wasn't scheduled per se. It was put in the coming soon category,
under consideration.
Right, exactly, knowing that it might very well pop in.
So let's just say that it gets moving along. Is it the kind of thing that we would expect to see within the cloud wallet, that you would be able to pick up a game, or is this ancillary to that? Is it not something that you would expect to see gaming integrated with the cloud wallet?
I don't think we've made a call on that yet, and it would not surprise me if the long haul the answer is yes. I don't know if the short-term answer will be yes. One of the things here that we want to do, though, is there's no reason you can't kind of wallet connect back to the cloud wallet. And it would not surprise me that the way that this is implemented is a web application that's kind of focused on the game itself, that uses Wallet Connect to come in and start the game. Because if you think about how this works, you basically stake in some Chia into this channel once you found a person you want to play against, and then once you do that, you don't talk to the blockchain unless somebody tries to cheat. So once your coins are in the channel a minute later, you just play. And so Wallet Connect is kind of all you need to really reach out and get a signature. Because when you're done playing and you guys are both like, okay, we're over, you can either leave the channel because you're going to play them again the next day or whatever. Think about it like just leaving your chips on the table, right? Or you go, no, we're done, and then you Wallet Connect and create a signature to spend your portion of the payment channel, or state channel, back into your wallet.
So I know there was some talk originally when state channels were being discussed that you could do it without a coin spend. Now this is really technical, but like I'm curious if the thinking was changed, that you could actually open a state channel with an offer and do it without doing a coin spend. Did you guys change your mind on that, or did that prove to not be possible?
That capability is totally there. It's just not clear that we want to do it for this. Because of the way the game works, it's probably just easier to do a spend.
Because you actually want to put the coins into a position where they, yeah,
right.
But that whole idea of being able to open a state channel without doing a coin spend seemed to be a pretty powerful one.
Yeah, and this is why when I say this isn't fully a payment channel, that's one of the things you'd really like for a payment channel. We don't need it for this, right?
Well, is that so conceptually? Is it harder to do? I mean, I get that you didn't need it, but like,
no, I wouldn't say, well, it's a little more complicated, but I mean, in a very straightforward manner that we all understand. It's just, do you want to spend the extra 2 weeks developing that or not? Right now? No.
Right. Can I ask you about silent payments? Have you been watching this on Bitcoin at all?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thoughts on silent payments, and like what about supporting this as something that we would do natively on Chia? I think that the main difference here is it would make the way that you would find your coins and syncing more like what Chia looked like originally, because it used to be that if you wanted to know the balance of your wallet, you had to sort of process every block. But we switched to a more of I think what's called an SPV wallet, where you're just like querying from various intensive puzzles and whatnot. Yeah, curious about your thoughts on silent payments.
Look, so from my point of view, those kinds of feature enhancements have always been things we want, have always been on our radar, but we wanted to sequence them very carefully. It's very easy to write various different implementations of silent payments. And one of the things we'd really like to do is to have a very, like, say, well-known corporate sponsor who needs that, so that we use that to set the narrative of why it's critically important that, for example, for, I don't know, international trade, they're almost a requisite to using a blockchain. So for us, it's always simply been a what's the best timing to implement those features, not can we or should we.
Well, the reason that I thought that this had started to come up, at least in the context of Bitcoin, was we're seeing all this privacy erosion type stuff, tornado mixers, like the standard ways that people have been trying to pursue privacy within public ledger blockchains that aren't natively set up for it, like say maybe Monero with the way that they implemented stuff. Is that they're looking for a way to make this more feasible and tractable. And you're saying, like, for this one you want a corporate sponsor, but I almost felt like maybe this was more of a base retail demand type thing, where when you think about something like cash, you have privacy by default. You don't have to sort of go pursue it. So that's where this one to me seemed like a development within the Bitcoin community as a reaction to, well, we got to do something here.
Yeah, look, if you remember, we saw forked in all the ZK operators for ZK payment channel, right? And that was a year ago or more.
Yeah, and I think Cameron said he was starting to mess around with it a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, we have internal designs. We know what we kind of want to do. Look, there's a debate politically on Capitol Hill about, like, the people who are like, I'm sorry, no, you're not killing cash. And the people who are like, but we want to kill cash. And what we don't want to do is get caught up in that debate on the wrong side without a very good argument about why. And right now, look, I believe the Tornado Cash developer will actually win. He may not win in the district court, but he'll probably win on appeal. I think he still stands a good chance of actually winning in the district court, because the district court judge is clearly asking the right questions. But we want to see a regulatory environment where we're making the point that real normal people, real businesses people respect, need these tools. Without that, right now the narrative is the North Koreans are building nuclear bombs with your privacy tools, and they're not exactly wrong, unfortunately.
I'm curious more about your thoughts on the Tornado Cash piece. So as far as asking the right questions, some of the questions that I saw getting asked that seemed to be the right questions were, well, wait a minute, how is it that somebody that doesn't have custody of these funds could be accused of this, as well as, like, you're trying some, like, piece of software versus the individuals. What were you looking at as far as Tornado Cash, and what are the right questions that the judge is asking?
Those are the two key things. I mean, the thing one is, and this is, by the way, this is a recurring theme across a tremendous amount of the regulatory environment. The real question for regulators is, does a third party have custody or not? Because, like, an exchange, a securities exchange, the exchange had custody. You had to trust other people not to keep their, fat fingers off your stuff.
Like FTX, when you've actually delegated your
Correct.
coins to this other entity.
Right. And so, like, Coinbase and FTX need regulation. Dexy.space is a website that shows you a view of a bunch of things that people have self-custody of.
Right. They're just a view into a public database.
Correct. And so the thing is like, how can you enable money laundering when you yourself don't touch the money? It's kind of like saying, the cardboard box that they shoved through the window at the Cayman branch of HSBC was a money launderer.
So does Chevron come into this case? Like, is it critical that like Chevron came up before the resolution of Tornado? Is that
no, not here? This is a straight criminal case from the US DOJ. In criminal matters, there is no deference to anybody. Remember, you have to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the thing is, I think he's not guilty by a matter of law. In other words, one of my favorite rules that I continue to use, and this comes out of some of the 3D printed gun litigation, other things we've been involved in. If you can file it on a federal court docket, it's speech.
Trying to process that one. Say that again. Can you explain that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so taking from my days of the PGP source code book, we've in various 3D printed gun cases filed the actual PDFs that people are claiming are somehow not protected speech. Now, we filed them under seal just because technically it would make the district court judge illegal in New Jersey, for example. But they're there, right next to the filings and orders and everything else, and you're telling me that is action when it fits on a federal court docket? I don't think that's the case. It'd be very easy to file the entire contents of all the Tornado Cash smart contracts on a federal court district docket.
Gotcha, because it's code, because you can write it down, because it's deployed. It's not the actions of individuals.
Correct. In fact, they lifted no fingers to move the North Koreans' money.
Gene, I'm glad you bring up this. I don't know, the nature of speech, the nature of criminal prosecutions. You said earlier the North Koreans are using this privacy, but it would seem to me that like we have this notion of commerce trumping security written into our Constitution. I don't. When you see attacks on private money, on private banking, you in the PGP case, you use the defense of speech, the First Amendment.
Yep.
But in the Constitution, we have limited the federal government to holding gold and silver, and removed from the ability of the states to hold currency. Do you think we're going to see a way back to that world with blockchains, or is that too far in the future?
Well, so look, there's a couple things going on. I don't know if you guys saw, because I tweeted it out. It was a case I was watching closely, that district court in Texas ruled that the ATF, you cannot brew whiskey at home rule, was unconstitutional.
I saw that.
Yep.
That's the at-home distilling of liquors.
Yeah, and the key there was, it's not like you have a right to distill liquor. It's that Congress is of limited powers. And so they were saying it was a tax, but the problem is it's not going toward your taxing authority to make it harder to otherwise create something you're trying to tax. Because of course, if you had a commercial space and you got the permit, you pay the tax. So like, it couldn't be a tax because you were actually limiting the number of people paying the tax. Like, that's not a tax. And then it wasn't commerce, because unlike Wickard, which was the wheat case, there they had price control set globally, and they were worried about what the price of corn was. And so, the fact that you would create for private use would take demand out of the market was relevant to the overarching regulatory scheme that Congress had passed. Here, nobody cares about how much liquor is created. You only care that the tax is paid. And so basically, that kind of interpretation is likely to be what we see from federal courts more and more. And so the further Congress is from the Constitution, or the regulatory agencies is from Congress, the more likely that's to be narrowed by the federal courts. But look, there's something I want to make very clear. we have an absolute constitutional right to be able to do private transactions. The third-party doctrine was probably wrongly decided, and blockchains are going to make it so the third-party doctrine is in fact a bad idea. Why do you want to give a third party control of your assets? You only want to transfer your assets atomically when you're trading for what you want.
Well, I mean, to be fair, until we had public blockchains, we really didn't have any mechanism for doing that. So
that's right.
I mean,
look, that's the key innovation, right? I mean, the key innovation
100%.
is self-custody. But my point is, having fought these wars now for going on 30 years, there is some sequencing you want to do so that you can capture the American public's view of what this stuff looks like. Like if we were out trying to push privacy features hard right now, the average American thinks blockchains are Sam Bankman-Fried and they're out to steal your money. This is not the time that you want to push hard on that. What you want to push hard on that is like if a consortia of banks wants to re-architect how vendor financing works and needs this to be able to make it work. Doesn't change your rights, just changes your likelihood of not having your rights be messed with.
Lucas, here was your opportunity to talk about PGP. I know you really wanted to ask a few questions to Gene about it. Did you have any follow-ups? I mean, we're talking about it. He mentioned it. Did you want to follow up on it?
I mean, no. Well, Gene, you bring up great points with regards to the shifting scale and how we get back to a constitution that's based off commerce, not off this notion of security. I was actually sitting here thinking, and we mentioned, or I've brought up on FOMO before, in the Constitution, there's also this concept of letters of marque.
Uh-huh.
And
as someone who owns a ship, Gene, do you have a letter of marque?
The Florida Carry guys tried to get the governor of Florida to sign a letter of marque for me, but he said no. But
I can't believe that. Yeah, your response, just put a massive smile on my face. Most people say, "What the hell is a letter of marque?"
So I actually I got that as a personalized license plate for a car I just recently got rid of, but California tried to deny me initially, and I went back with a letter, and they gave it to me.
Unbelievable. So you are a privateer.
Well, look, Bram and I are two of the few people you'll ever meet who've been officially accused of being pirates by a non-governmental organization. That was the Recording Industry Association for both of us. But once you're accused of being a pirate, you got to go with it.
Well, amen to that. I'm glad you fly the Jolly Roger high.
Wait a minute. Do you we're just gonna get silly here for a second. Do you actually have a Jolly Roger flag? Could you fly it on your boat?
Yes and no, because I actually take that stuff seriously, and the Coast Guard would not be amused.
Yeah, well, don't piss off the Coast Guard. You might need them someday.
Yeah, look, the real flag you want to fly if you want to be a pirate is the red.
Why? What's the red flag?
The red is no quarter. I'm going to kill all of you.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
So
the black was surrender.
It's Gene and John McAfee. It's like the two OG pirates sailing the high seas.
There you go.
Are flags the original offer files?
Yes.
Well, there we go. I think that you said something earlier too that I loved. You said the key innovation is self-custody. And it's something that we have to get back to. This notion of commerce is what binds us together, not security. And blockchain moving us out of these third-party parental units is going to get us back to a time of the future where things seemed a lot more right. But that's all I wanted. I'm glad we touched on that, but I'm enjoying you guys digging into the here and now and the technical aspects of Chia. So please continue.
Yeah, well, Gene, just a quick question on timing. Like sometimes we go an hour. Usually when we have a guest on, we'll allocate up to 2. It's up to you if you want to keep rolling here, if you want to roll out at the top of the hour. But yeah, just wanted to check in since we're like 4 minutes to the top.
I can do to the half hour after, but then I've actually got another interview coming up shortly after that. So
okay, well, we'll go for another half hour then. We'll take it.
Sure.
So I've been watching this talk of Bitcoin being used as a strategic reserve asset. I'm curious your thoughts on politicians saying this and the thought around Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. Does that definition mean something special to you? What are your thoughts constitutionally around that, and or like what does it mean for the U.S. government to hold their Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset?
Well, so look, there's the rest of the world, there's the United States on that question. For the rest of the world, Bitcoin is an interesting monetary hedge in the sense of if
Well,
the
and for Larry Fink too now, right?
yep,
That's what he
yep.
said.
Well, like so, and by the way, I wasn't saying the U.S. including all of her people. I was saying U.S. the federal government. Long term, at scale cryptocurrencies are going to be a check on governments' abilities to mishandle their currency. So, if too much M2 occurs and, we start hitting inflation again, Bitcoin's price is going to go up. Now, it's weird for the federal government to be doing that because they're the ones usually causing the inflation in question. So it's not clear to me they're recovering any value from that. It seems to be a net neutral trade from their perspective. But like if you're the
Right,
government,
because if they increase the M2, they massively inflate the dollar. If Bitcoin goes up, that's not a net win, right? Because
right,
whatever.
they lost buying power ultimately.
Well, so what did you think about Germany selling off of their Bitcoin?
And selling it off in such a way as to try to make everyone angry. That last part was especially dumb. At least the United States, when it sells its ill-gotten Bitcoin, tries to do it with least minimal impact and get the most value out. It does not surprise me the Germans are skeptical about cryptocurrency, but that's going to be a thing that they're going to learn is incorrect.
Yeah, Germany just jeeting its entire bag, like just daily dumping as fast as they could. But shockingly, Bitcoin barely went down.
Yep, there's real liquidity there.
But Germany also has severe problem. They have energy shortages. They have a problem getting and paying for energy. I don't know if you saw moves in South America with regards to deprioritizing the mining of Bitcoin because they have electricity shortages there. But I mean, it would seem to me there are countries who are going to be looking at it and say we control our own monetary base. We don't need the benefit of Bitcoin for being that policeman in our system. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's going to be a policeman. I think right now Bitcoin is the only one that's credible yet, but that's a matter of time. Because look, it is getting to the point where I'll back up. There's an issue floating, which is that the development and deployment of cryptocurrency, like the development and deployment of the internet, is likely to continue very quickly. And therefore, the monetary aspects of Bitcoin and any other cryptocurrency are likely to be somewhat washed out by that effect of adoption. And so it doesn't always behave the way it should if it was kind of a contra-cyclical cryptocurrency. But when you get to a much more steady state where it's like, a large portion or the portion it's going to be for the long term of the economy, then I think you'll see it much more clearly that like if the US dollar does something inflationary, Bitcoin's price goes up because basically it's saying, hey, look, the value that I'm storing here is going down in dollar terms, right?
Right, but do you think maybe Germany is thinking about other options and just saying Bitcoin's not the right fit for us? But
Well, that's what we had talked about, right, Lucas? Was are they selling off their Bitcoin to buy gold? And we looked, and I didn't see any evidence that they were doing that. So what are they doing with those proceeds?
I'm assuming that's tax revenue equivalent, and they're just using with the same reasons they'd use any tax dollar.
well, that's I don't know what Germany's doing with it, but I would think that they begin to understand that crypto that blockchains and crypto are going to have a greater effect on countries that are abusing their monetary system. And I would say Germany probably prides itself on not abusing their monetary system in their eyes, even though maybe somebody from Greece might disagree with them.
Yeah, well, remember the euro effect, right, means they don't have complete control. We'll say it that way.
Well, they don't think so.
Yeah, fair.
So, but to the electrical use of Bitcoin. I mean, what do you think that we're going to see more countries taking the actions of Venezuela, Ecuador, Paraguay, in turning off Bitcoin mining there because they don't have the electricity to sustain it?
Well, I think anywhere where the grid's under stress, you're going to see a desire to say, "Hey, look, this is not first and most important." I mean, do you want the oxygen and CPR monitoring tools at the hospital to work, or do you want the Bitcoin mine on? I get that. What I really think you're going to see is just price should do what price should do, and like usually when you look into these places where they're kind of cracking down on it, the price market doesn't work real normal. And in fact, one could argue a lot of the markets here in the U.S. and power don't work that way either. But ultimately, I think it boils down to you have this as a Bitcoin miner countervailing winds like cost of power and regulatory certainty for you, the miner. So like the United States and Canada look pretty compelling because you have the rule of law in both places and you can kind of predict outcomes. When you're in these other places, how do I put it? The politics work very differently. And it may be whether or not you know the right guy and whether you can pay him enough of the VIG to, keep your power on. So look, this is one of the Achilles heels of Bitcoin is that to be a validator is to have to ask these questions versus, hey, do I have an internet connection and do I have some storage? Like that one's much easier.
Okay. I want to ask one more question about reserve asset and definitions, but I hope that we can segue to a little bit talking about the current state of Chia and what's going on with NetSpace. So I want to stick with strategic reserve asset for a second. I heard you say that it's a net neutral trade, but as far as it being a strategic reserve asset, is it thinking about it the same way that we think about the strategic oil reserve? Is that the definition or the way that, some people have been contemplating Bitcoin as like it would be something like that, like the strategic oil reserve, and it would be regulated or governed the same way?
So look, there are a lot of things people in the Bitcoin world say that don't really make much sense. And this one to me falls a little in that category. If you're not a US entity and you are dollarized, right? Bitcoin could be a hedge of dollar misbehavior because from your perspective, your economy runs on that same dollar. And if Bitcoin price goes up because of that then the treasury of the government, has less deficit and so can intervene, for example, by buying and selling dollars in your own economy, right? But for the U.S., like Bitcoin's liquid. The United States government needs a bunch of Bitcoin. They can go to Coinbase and buy it.
I totally agree, Gene. On that, on the heels of that, like, as somebody who thinks about money and what the government is limited, should the government have ever had the federal government ever had the ability to have the strategic oil reserve?
Because that's national security, and that is a real national security issue. I mean, the 670s happened. It probably is within the four corners of the Constitution. Having the United States government as principal buy a strategic commodity and use it, I think is probably constitutional. Now, it needed enabling regulation.
But this Bitcoin doesn't rise to that level, right? I mean, it's not like oil. We don't run our tanks on it.
Right. And by the way, I mean, the Bitcoin that the United States government has generally been seized by the FBI and handed to the Marshal Service to liquidate.
Which they might be getting around to soon.
Well, actually, they've been ongoing liquidating for quite a while. I mean, but they're very careful about it, so it doesn't really have much price impact because they like the highest price for obvious reasons.
Very interesting. I was not aware of that. I thought they were probably sitting on it because of would the government sell drugs? But might be the way that they were looking at it.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like because it's federally legal, they can't do that. But Bitcoin itself is not federally legal.
Wait, what? Bitcoin is not federally legal? Say that again.
Federally illegal.
Illegal. Gotcha.
Yeah, the Coast Guard can't hand the cocaine to the Marshal Service, and the Marshal Service go sell it.
Well, wait a minute. I thought the government actually did that.
Well, but if the Coast Guard seized the yacht and the cocaine, the yacht goes to the Marshal Service and gets sold.
Right. They could sell the yacht, but they weren't supposed to sell the cocaine, but they did. But no.
They disposed of it, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we the other day had talked about net space. We've been looking at it, right? So we saw sort of this, I don't know, almost meteoric rise in net space, which seemed to be coupled with some other economic factors that were happening within the Chia ecosystem. And then recently we've seen that fall off a bit. Curious if your thinking is the same as ours, that it looks like to me that some people got into high energy, chia mining, or chia farming, which maybe they're not able to sustain in the way that they thought they could have. And so, if we saw a replot to high compression, high electrical cost, chia infrastructure, that this might be capitulation that we're seeing here. Are you guys thinking about the current net space decline? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, it's always going to be an interplay of price and right now electricity, and we're about to do something about taking the electricity piece back down a bit. Now, what's hilarious is on net as the network, we're actually using less power because you're plotting so much cheaper. But I certainly think that there were folks who got way over invested, and that was something we warned people to be careful about. Different folks are going to have very different price points at where they want to buy Chia, and also, very different time horizons. I mean, a lot of people know the Bitcoin story and are like, look, things are wild for years until it really takes off. I don't care that I might be net down, I don't know, $10 a month on stuff that I've already bought. Why do I care? Because I think the price of Chia is too low. It depends on what those views are. So, our view is that NetSpace has been incredibly resilient. And, we don't really necessarily need this much. There's a good argument that we have too much net space for the, incremental on the margin farmer to want to farm. But I also think there's a big piece of this, which is underestimated by the guys who try to scale it, that they're really fighting an army of Davids where people have went like, yeah, I bought 2 drives, and so I've got 44T of Chia farming, and the machine it's connected to would have been on anyway, and so I don't even look at my power bill, and I don't care, and I like winning blocks, and that's cool. I think there's a lot of that. I think that the number might be more like the 100T category, but I think there's a ton of people in that category. Because, to get to 100T, did you spend $2,000? Not even, right?
I tend to
I
agree.
was trying to pull up the dashboard, and I'm getting something off here because I was hoping we could throw something on the screen, but it's
We are
almost
migrating the dashboards from Amazon to our Kate's cluster, so you might have gotten very unlucky.
Dang it. Because I tried to pull up the last year, and it's like I don't see data there from a year. So
it is being worked on in real time. I just happened to remember they mentioned that earlier today.
Bummer. Anyway, yeah, I was hoping to show this sort of graph, but like you did bring up this one point, so I guess I'll just ask the question that I wanted to as a follow up to the net space discussion. So we saw, like, over the year time horizon, when plot compression sort of started to get to be a bigger thing. We went from like 22 exabytes up to something like 30 effective, right? And largely, it seemed like that wasn't net new drives coming online, but rather people replotting to high compression. But then now, in, I don't know, the last few months, we've seen that come back from that, and that's sort of what I was looking at. Was there was this kind of hill that we climbed up and then came back down on. Is there a number on exabytes of net space that sort of you guys look to and say, this is the magical line under which we do not want to go below?
So I wouldn't say that there's a hard and fast number, but here's how we think about it. There historically have been about 15 exabytes, not exabytes, of storage that isn't already sold each month in the supply channel. So that's kind of a place that we think about. We really like to be that you got to buy more than a month's worth of hard drives. But even buying a half a month's worth of hard drives is a really expensive endeavor, which would spike the price of hard drives and everybody would see coming. So, it's literally like even 7 exabytes would probably be enough to be secure. But I don't think we're ever going to get there. I think NetSpace is far stickier. I do think there's an interesting question about the replot, because I think a lot of folks are going to replot, and it's going to take long enough that people are going to be there, and we'll get there. That will certainly decrease net space because it will take the appeared net space out, making it more closer to the actual net space. But fundamentally, I'm not too worried about that. Plus, any go forward, you have to assume that this is not the price of Chia in a couple years. Just saying.
So when we're talking about the replot, are we talking about the upcoming proposed hard fork to bring in the uncompressible plots? Is that the replot that you're alluding to here?
Yeah, I'd use the words minimally compressible, because there's always a little more if you're willing to spend the CPU for it, right? Or the compute. But yes, we've learned a lot. Dr. Nick on the team, we've got Christoph and Dan, the IST Austrian and Stanford, working on that. We're hoping to have the proposal out in the next couple weeks. It will not be final, because there's an additional kind of aha we had as we were about to wrap it up right around the 4th of July. But we want to get the rest of it out in front of folks, and we'll explain the additional compression we're going to be adding at that point. We're actually leaning toward having 2 plot formats, one for SSD and one for hard drives. And the SSD one is a little smaller, but we could never work on a hard drive to prove.
And in the crew that you mentioned that's working on it, I didn't hear Bram's name mentioned.
Oh, Bram runs that team. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, gotcha.
I thought that was an assumption. My bad. Yeah, no.
Well,
that is
fair.
Bram hurting all those cats.
You did say that you're trying to get Bram out of an activity. I figured it was probably because he is becoming this is his number one focus. Is that accurate? Like, this is
pragmatically, that's what's occurred, right? He's been focused on that, and it's fun and exciting, and he's excited because the core math and the core assumptions were all right. It was just some of the things we learned about how GPUs can work. There were really straightforward ways to make it so that those tricks don't work. And we're kind of excited because I think, we tried to get people to attack proof of space before mainnet launch. And for whatever reason, people were excited about proof of time, but we're never really excited about proof of space in the same way. So like proof of time, never got much faster until we went to the ASIC, which we knew would be the case. But proof of space didn't. And it, kind of took the, actual hundreds of millions of dollars in effective bug bounty to get people to really focus on it. And now that we've got the learnings we wanted back then. And so, I think the next iteration is going to be that much better for the learning.
Can you talk more about the tricks? I guess I'm curious with respect to this, like, what were the specific, holes that got exploited, or like what got missed here in the first round? And I'm not trying to fault anybody for missing it, because it's sometimes these things take time. It's easy to scrutinize things, but once you get it into the real world and there's economic engine behind it, right? Somebody can actually make money off of something, then there's a real impetus to try and figure this stuff out. So sometimes that's really the kick in the ass that's needed to get things going in that direction. But I'm curious if you can talk more about what the tricks were.
So I can only do it at the highest level. And the right person to ask this question of is Bram, when we do the AMA to kind of roll this out, right? So, I would recommend asking it again. There were certain computations that the GPUs are just blazingly fast on that Bram wasn't really aware they were blazingly that fast on, that if he knew, he would have changed a couple table sizes and a couple back pointers, and it would have been much, much harder to get the kinds of compression levels that we're seeing. So it's really those kinds of basic items, in his talks with Mad Max, because we paid Max a bug bounty on some of this. And obviously, Dr. Plotter, Dr. Nick, it was really able to then take the things they had figured out and to bring those back to both Dan Benet, Bram, and Christoph. And Christoph was able to immediately look at some of the things Dan was saying and go, okay, this is how we take this compression idea to solve the ability for you to further compress this way, and here's how we'll do it in the proof of space. Because proof of space, very much a Bram and Christoph invention. Worth a little history here. When building proof of space, Bram would go to Greg Maxwell and say, can you beat it? And the first couple ones Greg could beat. But then he handed him one that Greg couldn't beat. And so he took that one back to Christoph, and Christoph beat that one. And Bram went back to the drawing board and said, I think I've got it. He handed it to Greg Maxwell, and Greg went, I can't beat it again. And then he handed it to Christoph, and Christoph was like, I'm going to mathematically prove it doesn't work. And in doing so, he proved it did work. So that was kind of the history of proof of space. And so in many ways, you kind of brought that team back together with, more Dan Benet involvement than we had in the past. And obviously Dr. Nick and Mad Max and others. And so it was a really, powerful group that could talk about both the applied, what's possible in the hardware, all the way back to what's state of the art and additional compression mechanisms, so that the default plot format is, approaching the kind of maximum compression you could possibly get.
And is it all focused on GPUs, or is the team also thinking about, well, what other kind of more exotic processor types or other stuff that might be on the horizon that could feasibly be deployed against this, that it needs to be hardened against?
Well, so we already understood the CPU trade-offs, right? And a lot of this is really originally bounded by the speed with which memory can be fed to either a GPU or a CPU. It's the bus speed that often is a problem here. And that doesn't really go away because sooner or later you have to have your parallelism come back together. You're always going to be able to divide the work up a little bit, but the thing is, it gets really, really expensive. It's like if you wanted to try to like quickly plot with 4 different GPUs at once, that's going to be so much more expensive than the equivalent drive space, right? Because it's never that you couldn't do it this. We always knew you could. It's that you want to tilt the economics such that the drives always win for the honest farmer, and even the dishonest farmer doesn't really have an advantage over the honest farmer.
And when we're talking about that, we're really talking about this whole idea of you can fake, or sort of quote unquote in air quotes, fake space versus actually just using the space and having something equivalent. And so when you think about, well, what is the electrical cost? What is the CapEx cost? Which is cheaper to do? Plot once, put it to a drive, and pretty much use no electricity versus do these much more exotic things and have a bunch of capex and a bunch of electricity and say, well, what have you really gained at the end? Is that sort of the calculation?
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing that we worry the most about is a GPU rental attack. What that would look like is that you would basically mess with the chain for an hour by emulating 24 exabytes of storage yourself. This is thousands to tens of thousands of GPUs, and right now finding tens of thousands of GPUs that are fully available for an hour is a non-trivial task. But that can change in the future. And so what we really want to do is continue to make that be a very, very expensive attack, because the reason you might want to do that would be to like try to drain the bridge, or try to mess with a DeFi contract internally during that hour. So that's the thing we keep our eye on most. Now, when we do it right, it also makes it so that as a farmer, most farmers will probably want a GPU to plot, just because GPU plotting is going to remain very quick. CPU plotting will remain, and if you're not in a big rush, it'll be fine. It's just not going to be as fast as GPU plotting. But once plotted, use your GPU for something else.
And this for hard forking this in, it's a process, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
K32 is the dominant plot format that's out there. This is the most common thing that exists. Are we upping the K size at the same time we're forking this in to make it even harder, or is it we're going to stick with K32?
It actually looks like we might shrink the initial size a little bit.
So the size of the plot would go down, but
Yeah.
would we still be using the same terminology as
I
far as the 30?
believe K32 will just be smaller to start with.
Well, so what's the thought there? Why not just like bump this one unit, go to K33 or K34?
It turns out that that's not as useful stopping the attacks as you otherwise would expect, and that's one of those things. Again, hold that question when we start to roll this out, because people smarter about this particular topic than me can explain it better. But my point is that the flip side of that is making the initial plot format size a little smaller just continues to make it easier over time for hobbyist farmers to just allocate spare space, because over time we humans tend to have about half our space free at all times, and we've just been in this weird period where SSDs kind of shrunk that, but we're coming out of that. And when we come out of that and go to SSDs and SSD plots, remember we talked about having 2 plot formats, the SSD plot will be even smaller than the HDD plot of the same K. And so it's kind of interesting for people to be able to honestly have 20 plots on a machine and that would otherwise be on, and just farm.
Lucas, we've got about 10 minutes left. What other questions have you got for Gene? I'm reaching the end of the highly technical stuff that I wanted to get asked during this conversation. So I didn't know if you wanted to turn the conversation back to any last minute things. We've got probably time for one more topic if something's come up, or that you had something that was burning that you wanted to ask Gene about.
Nothing really burning. I've really enjoyed it, Gene. You've said some things that warmed my heart. Money's going to do what, or price should do what price should do, and other things. Very clippable. I did, as I was sitting here, and I've also enjoyed you guys digging into the technical aspects of what's going on Chia. But as far as community goes, Gene, we had Matt Hintz on with his real estate project recently, which was not on my radar. Just happened to hear Matt in a space, and then he came on, and we were sort of blown away by the depth of that project. I wondered, and he mentioned that he had worked with you, got advice from you. I wondered if you had anything to say about it. We haven't had him back on for a freshen up, but I was sitting here wondering about that. Also, I know Tang Talk Wireless has turned some heads. Any other I don't know, projects, things going on in the Chia ecosystem that you've got your eyes on?
Well, so first on Matt's project, with the caveat that this is not financial advice, what I can tell people is that we have worked closely with them, and what they're doing is very real. It is very compliant, and you need to make your own investment decisions against it. But what they're doing has decades of history about doing it this way. What they're doing is making it far more easy to get involved and getting far more people access to this investment category.
We
right?
were shocked by that when they said how much time they had spent with lawyers and sort of in stealth trying to figure out how to do this regulatory, and how much precedent there was for what they were actually trying to do, and what blockchain could do to improve it. I always love that, honestly.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, so Thomas and I have been close. We were helping them find counsel as well, and we've been following along. We're going to do some supportive things here and there. We think this is real. If you're going to invest in this, you need to realize there is a counterparty and there are some risks, right? But it's not anything but an actual real thing that they're explaining to you, and it works the way they say it does.
Well, and I mean, tokenizing assets is something that people throw around all the time. And we mentioned Larry Fink and Blackrock and tokenizing assets, but there was one of the first projects that I had heard that is actually going out and tokenizing assets, and is an emergent project rather than waiting for somebody who's already in that game to do it. And I'm fascinated with Tang Talk because it's also using blockchain for communication. Great use. Is there any other projects that are on Chia that we should keep our eye on? That anything that pops into your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So Circa DAO and their over collateralized stablecoin is going to launch here in the near future. Certainly about before the end of the year, and I think sooner than that. That's going to be very exciting for a whole host of reasons. For farmers, it's an interesting way to pay your op costs today without necessarily incurring a tax liability by selling Chia. And with all of the tools that One Market offers, it really lets you do crazy things like write futures contracts on stablecoin. Like, there's fun stuff coming from that. There is at least 2 more projects that are still in the stealth category that we get to hear about them first, if you might imagine why, that I'm excited about. But you'll be hearing from those folks probably in like September or October timeframe.
How about any new enterprise projects that are happening with Chia? Is there some stuff that you can't tell us about, but that's happening? Anything you can allude to on that front? I know in the early days you guys had code names for various enterprise projects that were happening at Chia, but haven't heard as many code names. Is there a new code name that you guys are excited about?
No, but I can tell you there are some very late stage, very real opportunities, both in luxury and in kind of advanced equities. And those are the things we're going to be pursuing and likely to announce, during the second half of this year.
Right. I saw the luxury a good one as far as this is being able to say that the good was real, and sort of countering this counterfeit goods market, right? You can't fake an NFT, you can't fake a DID.
Yeah, and it's also the EU has asked that the supply chain be identified and certified as well. And so there's a whole kind of package which takes like data layer and allows like a bag manufacturer to assert initially all of the stuff that's coming in from the supply chain to build that bag, but then later get the actual suppliers to be a data layer participant and assert that on their own as they deliver it. And then that ties directly cryptographically into the NFTs that get issued for the actual bags. So you have a cryptographic path back to all of the, inputs.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that's a regulatory requirement in the EU. So it's a thing that all of the brands have to solve, and we think we have a very unique solution to that.
And that's existing regulations that were already in place, and this is being viewed as a way to do it better, or was there some new regulations that came down that
I believe it's relatively new, or said differently, it's passed but isn't effective yet, and so people are figuring out how the heck they're going to comply with it, right?
An idea whose time has come.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're right at the time when you said you could be here. Gene, loved having you on the show. This was fantastic. Glad that some folks had a chance to join in and listen to the conversation that we had with Gene. So yeah, if you want to keep up with what's going on at Chia, you can check out the Twitter handle at Chia Network, and you can also check out Gene's Twitter handle at Hoffman. There's a lot of other places you can sort of spider out into the world of Chia to get some more information there. And yeah, had a lot of fun having you on.
Thank you, man. It was a pleasure and nice chatting with both of you.
Really enjoyed it. It was awesome. Thanks, Gene.
Thank you.